The Middle East is reeling from two major military strikes on Monday. A convoy of aid workers in Gaza was fired upon by Israeli forces. World Central Kitchen says 7 of its employees were killed in the strike, including nationals from Gaza, Australia, Britain, Poland, and a Canada-U.S. dual national. Many countries, including Canada, are condemning the strike and are calling on Israel to conduct a full and transparent investigation into the incident. Also struck on Monday, a building in Syria's capital. Iran says Israeli warplanes targeted Iranian officials in Damascus, killing 7 senior officers. Among those killed, 3 Iranian generals, including the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps Quds forces. The Israeli military is declining to comment on the deadly strike. Iran, however, is threatening to retaliate. So there's a lot to talk about, and joining me now are 2 former career diplomats. Dennis Horak served as Canadian ambassador to Saudi Arabia, head of mission in Iran, and director of the Middle East Division. Arif Lalani served as Canadian ambassador to Jordan, Iraq, and the United Arab Emirates. Arif is now a senior advisor at Strategy Corp. Gentlemen, good to see you both again. Dennis, I want to start, if I can, with the deadly strike on those aid workers in Gaza. A lot of different countries involved is drawing international condemnation. Prime Minister Netanyahu is describing it as tragic but unintentional. What are your thoughts on the incident and the potential fallout and the condemnation?
Well, to start with, it's unacceptable, and it's tragic for the workers and for their families. It's likely akin to a friendly fire. I understand that they had some deconfliction discussions with the Israelis, and so it's as horrible it is to say these things happen in war. It doesn't excuse it. It's like a friendly fire situation. It needs to be investigated. It needs to find out what happened, what broke down, and to make sure it doesn't happen again, because humanitarian aid needs to get into Gaza. These kinds of organizations were filling a gap, and now they're pulling back, and that's not helpful.
So Arif, World Central Kitchen, people would know, has got a celebrity chef, Chef Jose Andres as its head. They go and do work in all kinds of dangerous spaces, and they said the Israeli military was aware of the aid workers' presence and their movement in Gaza. Netanyahu said the incident was tragic but unintentional, and then he said, this happens in war. How do you think the countries whose civilians were killed are going to feel about that statement from Prime Minister Netanyahu?
Well, I think it's a very unfortunate statement. And the question I ask myself today is this going to be a before and after moment? In these crises, we come to moments that are either before or after. And so there is a lot of outrage today. There are a lot of demands being made, but the question is, a week from now, will anything have changed? Or will this be, as the Prime Minister of Israel has said, just another thing that happens in war? So I think the next few days are crucial to see what the international community and Israeli citizens have to say about this.
So Arif, do you think this could change how Israel is conducting the war in Gaza? Do you think this could prompt any kind of a re-examination or a change in their tactics and operations?
Well, I think that remains to be seen. And it's interesting because the Israeli Prime Minister and the Israeli Defense Forces have today come out and said that, in fact, essentially, it was their attack and it was unintentional. So the question is, what actually are they going to investigate? What are the findings? And it seems to me the question has to revolve around what have been and what should be in the future the rules of engagement for the Israeli Defense Forces, particularly in these areas that are so-called humanitarian corridors, deconflicted zones. Have certain rules of the road in international conflict. You communicate where you're going to be, and you're in communication with the forces, and you're expected to be able to pass freely. That clearly didn't happen here. And so I think it's very important for the international community to make clear what are the expectations of this investigation. What does impartial mean? What does timely mean? What is going to be investigated? And what is actually going to change? Because the Israeli Defense Forces have said that the investigation would lead to avoiding these kinds of instances.
So Dennis, we have a situation with a Canada-U.S. dual national. We don't know any identities yet. Multiple British citizens, Poland, Australia. How do these countries respond to this on a consular level, on a diplomatic level, after something like this has happened?
Well, I think a number of the countries have already called in the Israeli ambassador to launch formal complaints. That's a sort of standard response. There will also be increased diplomatic pressure on Israel to work on the humanitarian aid deliveries and to make sure this doesn't happen again, and try and find out a way to do this with the humanitarian corridors to protect them, to increase aid. There will be a lot of pressure on all of the countries, not just those who are directly affected, but by a lot of the countries on Israel to change the way they're operating in terms of delivery of humanitarian aid. You had a situation where you had these private or independent aid, humanitarian aid organizations delivering food, in part because Israel was concerned and others were concerned about UNRWA, which was a delivery mechanism in Gaza. Now these organizations are pulling out. So how is this aid going to get in there? How is Israel going to ensure the safety of those delivering the aid? All of those issues are going to be addressed, and those countries in particular who had citizens killed in this attack are going to put extra pressure on Israel to try and sort this out and deconflict whatever happens with the aid deliveries.
Okay, Dennis, I want to stick with you because this incident, it happened on the heels of this, what is suspected to be an Israeli strike on senior Iranian commanders in Damascus. And some analysts view what happened here, an airplane strike on some sort of a building that may or may not have been part of a diplomatic compound. They see it as an escalation in this long-fought shadow war between Iran and Israel. What are your thoughts on this? How do you view this one?
First of all, diplomatic premises have to be out of bounds in war. That's standard. That's Vienna Conventions, all of these rules of war. That being said, I have to say that I find it a bit rich, Iran invoking the inviolability of diplomatic premises when they've had many attacks on diplomatic premises in Tehran, beginning in '79 with the occupation and takeover of the U.S. Embassy, followed in 2006 by a Molotov cocktail attack on the Danish embassy. 2011, the occupation of the British embassy, the looting of British embassy staff quarters, the restraints put on British embassy staff, and then in 2016, the setting fire to the Saudi embassy in Tehran. So it doesn't mean that Iran doesn't have the right to point out that these were diplomatic presence, but it does make it a bit rich and a bit ironic that the kind of protection or the lack of protection they provide to diplomatic premises in Tehran needs to be seen in that context.
But Arif, is this an escalation from the Israeli side? And despite the hypocrisy from Iran that Dennis has just recounted, how do you think they might respond to this, retaliate to this? Because they are promising to hit back.
Well, I think it's an escalation in that it's an act that hasn't been done previously in this conflict. So I think Dennis is right. However, the challenge I see in all of this, including the killing of the civilian aid workers today and the attack of a diplomatic embassy in a third country, is that this conflict seems to be a little bit unmanaged and out of control. And I think that that's what worries me. There doesn't seem to be a set of countries or a set of leaders that really seem to have a vision of how this ends or how this is conducted. And therefore, we are continually having these moments where we're not sure whether there's going to be an escalation and things are going to get out of control. Iran has said they will retaliate. Let's hope that this is not a before and after moment on that issue, and that they don't try to escalate and that they pick some kind of a measured response. So that's what I'm really troubled by, is I don't see the Americans or the Israeli leadership or other leadership being engaged to try to manage these series of conflicts going on at the moment in the Middle East.
Well, Arif, that's something you've been mentioning really throughout the months that we've been talking about this, right? Like the tactics are clear, the bigger strategy isn't. Is sort of the criticism, and that's been apparently some of the conversation between the Americans and the Israelis, is what is your end goal beyond destroy Hamas? What does victory look like? And that seems not at all clear right now still, right, Arif?
Yeah, and look, I'm not at all convinced that there is going to be a lot of pressure to bear. I think there's a lot of wishful thinking today on trying to pressure the Israeli government on one issue or the other. I'm not seeing that pressure day after day. So I really think the next couple of days are important. And the missing piece, you're right, David, that I've been saying is I think the Americans need to engage other large, powerful countries to help manage this. And of course, I'm thinking of China here. And President Biden just had a conversation today with President Xi. I'm hoping that they had some discussion about how do they manage this regional conflict in addition to the others that they have been discussing. And I would just point out that at the height of the Cold War with the Soviet Union, the Americans still managed to deal with the Soviet Union to try to control conflicts.
Right.
So I think you have to try to figure out a way to engage the Chinese to put pressure on Iran and others in the region.
Dennis, just your quick final thoughts on that. And the worry about this has been escalation and lack of containment. This suggests it could happen. What are your thoughts on whether this can be contained?
Yeah, it's always a risk, and I keep coming back to the point that I don't think any of the sides wanted to escalate into a full-blown war, and so we'll have to see how Iran responds. They've pointedly noted that in their view, the Americans were involved, and that may give them an opening to start to launch some militia organized attacks in Iraq or in Syria, as they did before, as they did when Soleimani was killed, for example, or in other instances. We'll see how they respond directly to Israel, maybe getting Hezbollah to fire some more missiles, more than they've already been doing. I don't know, but I still cling to the hope that nobody wants this to escalate into a fuller war, including the Iranians. So some sort of measured response, I think, is the hope, and I think the messages through various channels will go down that road.
Okay, gentlemen, always appreciate the time and the insight. That's former ambassadors Dennis Horak and Arif Lalani. Thanks so much, gang.
Thank you.
Thank you.